London, 1817. Lady Theodora Greystone stood before the gilded mirror in her bedchamber, regarding her reflection with clinical detachment. 23 years of age, passably handsome with chestnut hair and eyes the color of spring hyacinths, and utterly, catastrophically ruined. "It appears I have precisely 2 options remaining," she murmured, smoothing her hands over the pale blue silk of her morning dress. "The Abbey or the altar?" Her lady's maid, Fletcher, clucked sympathetically as she arranged Theodora's hair. "Surely it cannot be as dire as all that, my lady." "Oh, but it is," Theodora replied, her mouth curving into a humorless smile. "When one's father gambles away the family fortune and then conveniently expires before settling his debts, leaving his daughter with nothing but an entailed estate that passes to a distant cousin, one's circumstances become exceedingly dire indeed." Her father, the late Earl of Warrington, had possessed many qualities. Prudence, unfortunately, had not been among them. "I require a husband, Fletcher," Theodora continued, rising from her dressing table. "One with sufficient wealth to preserve Thornfield and maintain my mother in the manner to which she has become accustomed. Love, as you know, is a luxury I cannot afford." Fletcher's expression grew troubled. "But surely you desire some measure of affection in your marriage, my lady?" Theodora laughed, the sound as brittle as winter ice. "Affection? What nonsense! Marriage is a business arrangement, nothing more. Only the very young or very foolish believe otherwise. My mother married for love, and look where that has led us, to the brink of ruin. The irony did not escape her. The very estate she was desperate to save had been the setting for her parents' love match, a union that had begun with passionate devotion and ended with her father drinking himself into an early grave while her mother retreated behind closed doors, emerging only to lament her fate as the widow of a wastrel. No, Theodora would not repeat her mother's mistake. She would make a sensible match with a man of means, one who understood that marriage was a contract, not a grand passion. Her heart would remain firmly under lock and key, safe from the follies that had destroyed her parents. "Love," she said, gazing out the window at the rolling grounds of Thornfield, "is nothing but a pretty fairy story told to young girls before they learn the harsh truths of the world." Later that afternoon, Theodora sat in the drawing-room opposite Mr. Hodgkins, her father's solicitor, as he delivered the final blow to her already precarious situation. "I regret to inform you, Lady Theodora, that the situation is even more grave than we initially believed," Mr. Hodgkins said, shuffling through a stack of papers. "Your father's creditors are growing impatient. Without immediate action, you will lose Thornfield within the month." Theodora maintained her composure, though her fingers tightened imperceptibly around the handle of her teacup. "A month? I was under the impression we had until the season's end to settle matters." "I'm afraid the principal creditor, Sir Reginald Blackmer, has called in the debt immediately," Mr. Hodgkins replied, his expression apologetic. "He is not known for his patience or mercy." "I see," Theodora said, her voice steady despite the panic threatening to overwhelm her. "And what of my mother's jointure? Surely that cannot be touched. Your father, regrettably, used it as collateral for his final venture." "It is gone, my lady." The cup trembled in her hand. Setting it down with deliberate care, Theodora rose from her chair and walked to the window. Outside, the gardeners were pruning the ancient rose bushes that had been planted by her grandmother. Soon, they would belong to someone else. "Then there is nothing for it," she said, turning back to face the solicitor. "I must marry, and quickly." Mr. Hodgkins cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Indeed, that would seem the most expedient solution. However, given the circumstances, you may find the selection of suitable candidates somewhat limited." What he meant, of course, was that word of her father's disgrace had already spread through society like wildfire. No gentleman of good standing would tie himself to a family mired in debt and scandal unless there was something exceptional to be gained. I am not without certain advantages, Mr. Hodgkins, Theodora replied coolly. My title remains, as does my connection to the Duchess of Havensfield, who has agreed to sponsor my debut this season. I may be impoverished, but I am still the daughter of an earl. Of course, my lady, Mr. Hodgkins said hastily. I merely meant to suggest that time is of the essence. On that point, we are in complete agreement. Theodora's smile did not reach her eyes. I shall depart for London tomorrow. 1 month is ample time to secure a husband, particularly when one is not encumbered by such frivolities as romantic attachment. The London season was in full swing when Theodora arrived at her great-aunt's townhouse in Grosvenor Square. The Duchess of Havensfield, a formidable woman of 70 whose razor-sharp wit had terrorized the ton for half a century, greeted her with a critical eye. You've grown thinner, girl, she declared, circling Theodora like a general inspecting a new recruit. Though I suppose that's fashionable these days. Your coloring is good, at least. We'll have you fitted for new gowns immediately. Aunt Catherine, Theodora began, I appreciate your generosity, but I'm afraid I haven't the funds for nonsense. The Duchess cut her off with a wave of her bejeweled hand. Consider it an investment in your future. Or mine, for that matter. I've no intention of supporting your mother in her dotage, which means you must secure a wealthy husband post-haste. Theodora smiled wryly. Your candor is refreshing, as always. At my age, one has earned the right to plain speaking, the Duchess replied, settling into a chair by the fire. Now, tell me precisely how dire your circumstances are, and do not attempt to soften the blow. I detest prevarication. By the time Theodora had finished outlining her situation, the Duchess's expression had grown grave. A month, you say? That is indeed troublesome. She tapped her fingers against the arm of her chair thoughtfully. We shall need to be strategic. The Harrington ball is tomorrow night. Every eligible bachelor of means will be in attendance. I place myself entirely in your hands, Aunt, Theodora said, meaning it. If anyone could orchestrate a match that would save Thornfield, it was the Duchess of Havensfield. Very wise, her aunt replied with a thin smile. Now, as to potential candidates. She began listing names, evaluating each gentleman's fortune, status, and character with the precision of a military tactician. Theodora listened attentively, mentally cataloguing the strengths and weaknesses of each potential husband. She felt no spark of anticipation, no flutter of romantic hope, only a grim determination to secure her future with the same cool-headed practicality with which one might select a horse or negotiate a business contract. Love, after all, was a luxury she could ill afford. The Harrington ballroom glittered with candles and jewels, a dazzling spectacle of wealth and privilege. Theodora, resplendent in a new gown of emerald silk that set off her eyes and pale complexion to perfection, stood beside her great-aunt, surveying the crowd with calculated interest. Lord Penley, the Duchess murmured, nodding subtly toward a portly gentleman by the punch bowl. 50 years old, widowed, no children. Estate in Yorkshire yields 15,000 per annum. Rumoured to suffer from gout and a fondness for young serving girls. Theodora suppressed a grimace. Next, if you please. Viscount Meryton, the Duchess continued, indicating a tall, handsome young man surrounded by admirers. Impeccable lineage, charming manner. Fortune of 30,000. Unfortunately, has already squandered half of it on gaming and racing. Like father, like daughter, Theodora murmured. I think not. They continued in this manner, eliminating candidate after candidate, until Theodora began to fear that her quest was doomed before it had properly begun. Either the gentleman possessed wealth but unacceptable character flaws, or they were pleasant enough but lacked the means to save Thornfield. "This is becoming rather disheartening, Aunt," Theodora admitted as they paused to take refreshment. The Duchess snorted inelegantly. "Marriage often is, my dear. But, Her eye suddenly sharpened, focusing on a point across the room. "Fortune smiles upon us at last." Theodora followed her gaze to see a tall, imposing figure standing near the entrance to the ballroom. Even from a distance, the man commanded attention. He was dressed with impeccable taste in severe black and white evening clothes that emphasized his broad shoulders and athletic build. His features were striking rather than conventionally handsome, a strong jaw, aquiline nose, and penetrating eyes beneath straight dark brows. "Who is he?" Theodora asked, finding herself oddly captivated despite her determination to remain detached. "That, my dear, is Count Thaddeus Grantham," the Duchess replied with evident satisfaction. "Recently returned from the continent, where he made a vast fortune in shipping and trade. New money, of course, but an exceptional amount of it. Rumored to be worth 50,000 per annum at the very least." Theodora raised an eyebrow. "A count with a distinctly English name." "His grandfather was granted the title by some German principality for services rendered during the 7 Years' War," her aunt explained. "The family has estates in both England and Bavaria, I believe. He's been abroad for nearly a decade, something about expanding the family business." "And his character?" Theodora inquired, watching as several young ladies and their mammas converged on the Count, only to be rebuffed with cool politeness. The Duchess's lips curled into a smile. "Impeccable, from all accounts. Serious-minded, responsible, no gambling or excessive drinking. Rather reserved in manner. Not one for frivolous attachments or romantic entanglements." "He sounds perfect," Theodora murmured, a small spark of hope kindling in her breast. "There is, however, one small complication," the Duchess added, lowering her voice. "The man is notorious for his aversion to marriage. He has refused every eligible young lady presented to him since his return to England. Some say he harbors a deep distrust of women after some youthful disappointment." Theodora's hopes dimmed. "Then why do you consider him a prospect?" "Because, my dear," the Duchess replied with a gleam in her eye, "he also happens to be in need of something that you can provide, entree to the highest circles of society. His fortune may be vast, but certain doors remain closed to him due to his mercantile connections. A marriage to the daughter of an earl would solve that problem rather neatly. A mutually beneficial arrangement," Theodora mused, her interest rekindling. "A business proposition, in essence." "Precisely," her aunt confirmed. "And if I'm not mistaken, the man approaches business with the same cold logic that you apply to the prospect of marriage." Before Theodora could respond, the orchestra struck up a waltz. The Duchess raised an imperious hand, catching the attention of an elderly gentleman nearby. "Lord Harrington," she called. "Be a dear and present my niece and me to Count Grantham. It's high time we welcomed him back to England properly." Lord Harrington, their host, hurried over with alacrity. Few people dared refuse a direct request from the Duchess of Havensfield. "Of course, Your Grace. It would be my pleasure." Moments later, Theodora found herself face to face with Count Grantham. Up close, she could see that his eyes were an unusual shade of grey, the color of storm clouds on the horizon. They assessed her with an intensity that was both disconcerting and strangely thrilling. "Count Grantham, may I present Her Grace, the Duchess of Havensfield, and her great-niece, Lady Theodora Greystone," Lord Harrington announced. The Count executed a flawless bow. "Your Grace." "Lady Theodora." "It is an honor." His voice was deep and resonant, with just the faintest trace of an accent that Theodora couldn't quite place. "We are delighted to make your acquaintance, Count," the Duchess said warmly. "My niece has just arrived in London for the season. Perhaps you might partner her for the next dance? She is an excellent waltzer." Theodora maintained her composure, though inwardly she winced at her aunt's transparent matchmaking. To her surprise, the Count's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I would be honored," he said, extending his hand to Theodora. "If Lady Theodora is amenable, of course." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Theodora sensed that he understood exactly what was transpiring, the careful social maneuvering, the unstated agendas. More surprisingly, he seemed amused rather than offended by it. "I should be delighted, Count Grantham," she replied, placing her gloved hand in his. As he led her onto the dance floor, Theodora was acutely aware of the eyes following them. The mysterious Count and the Earl's daughter, no doubt they made a striking pair. "Your aunt is not one for subtlety, I see," the Count remarked as they took their positions for the waltz. Theodora couldn't help but laugh. "No, subtlety has never been among Aunt Catherine's virtues. I do hope you'll forgive her rather blatant matchmaking." "There is nothing to forgive," he replied, his hand settling at her waist as the music began. "I find directness refreshing in a world of veiled intentions and polite dissembling." They moved together with surprising ease, his lead confident without being overbearing. Theodora had danced with many partners over the years, but none had made her feel quite so secure. "In that case, Count," she said, emboldened by his frankness, "perhaps I might be direct as well." A glimmer of interest sharpened his gaze. "Please do. I find myself in need of a husband of means, and you, I believe, might benefit from a connection to an established family. I propose we consider whether an arrangement between us might be mutually advantageous." For a moment, the Count's steps faltered, the first sign of imperfection she had observed in him. Then he recovered, a startled laugh escaping him. "Lady Theodora, you are certainly your aunt's relation," he said, genuine amusement warming his voice. Most young ladies would swoon at such a bold declaration. "I am not most young ladies," she replied simply. "No," he agreed, his eyes studying her face with new interest. "You are not." They completed the waltz in silence, though Theodora could practically hear the wheels turning in the Count's mind. As the music drew to a close, he led her from the dance floor with impeccable courtesy. "I have business in the city tomorrow morning," he said as they reached the edge of the ballroom. "But perhaps you would do me the honor of riding with me in the park the following afternoon. We might continue our discussion." Theodora inclined her head gracefully. "I should like that very much, Count Grantham." "Thaddeus," he corrected her, his voice dropping to a register that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "If we are to discuss a potential alliance, I think we might dispense with some formalities." "Theodora," she offered in return, surprised by how natural it felt. He bowed over her hand, his lips barely brushing her gloved knuckles. "Until the day after tomorrow, then, Theodora." As he walked away, Theodora realized that her heart was beating rather faster than the exertion of the dance warranted. She attributed it to the excitement of having found a potential solution to her predicament so quickly. Nothing more. Certainly, it had nothing to do with the way the Count's rare smile transformed his austere features, or how his hand had felt, strong and steady, against her waist. Nothing at all. 2 days later, Theodora sat beside Count Grantham in his elegant phaeton as they drove through Hyde Park at the fashionable hour. She was acutely aware of the attention they attracted, the mysterious Count and the Earl's daughter, together for the second time in as many days. By tomorrow, the gossips would be predicting an engagement, which, if all went as planned, might not be far from the truth. Your situation is indeed precarious, the Count said after Theodora had explained her circumstances in frank detail. A month is very little time to secure your future. Yes, she agreed, appreciating his understanding. And while I have no wish to appear mercenary, I must be practical. My mother's welfare depends upon my making an advantageous match. The Count nodded, his expression thoughtful as he guided the horses around a bend in the path. And romance plays no part in your considerations? None whatsoever, Theodora assured him firmly. I have seen firsthand the damage wrought by romantic folly. I seek a rational partnership based on mutual respect and shared interests. A business arrangement, in essence, he said, echoing her earlier thoughts. Precisely. The Count was silent for a moment, his attention seemingly focused on the path ahead. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. And what of children? Most men desire heirs. Theodora felt a flush rise to her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. I have no objection to fulfilling that aspect of the marital contract, assuming a respectful approach to the proceedings. The corner of his mouth twitched. Very practically put. I believe in addressing matters directly, she replied, keeping her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. Coyness serves no purpose in negotiations. Indeed not, he agreed. He hesitated, then continued, since we are being candid, I should tell you that I had not planned to marry at all. My business interests keep me traveling extensively, and I have grown accustomed to my independence. Theodora's heart sank, though she was careful not to let her disappointment show. I understand. I appreciate your honesty, Count Thaddeus. However, he continued, surprising her, your proposal has merit. As your aunt no doubt informed you, certain social circles remain closed to me despite my wealth. A connection to your family would be advantageous. Hope rekindled in Theodora's breast. And I would benefit from your financial resources. A tidy arrangement, he agreed, his expression unreadable. Though I would add certain stipulations. Such as? Theodora asked, her mind already racing ahead to practical considerations. First, that we maintain separate residences when I am required to travel for business. I have no wish to uproot you from society each time duty calls me abroad. Theodora nodded. That seemed reasonable enough. Second, that we agree to mutual respect and fidelity, despite the practical nature of our union. I may not believe in romantic love, but I do believe in honor. Of course, she said, somewhat taken aback by the suggestion that she might have considered otherwise. And finally, he said, turning to look at her directly, that we allow ourselves 3 months of acquaintance before formalizing any arrangement. Marriage, even one of convenience, is not a step to be taken lightly. Theodora frowned. 3 months is impossible. I have 1 month at most before I lose Thornfield. Ah, but that is easily remedied, the Count replied smoothly. Upon our formal engagement, I would immediately settle your father's debts as a gesture of good faith. If, after 3 months, either of us wishes to dissolve the arrangement, you would owe me nothing. That is extremely generous, Theodora said, stunned by the offer. It is practical, he corrected her. I have no desire to bind myself to a woman who might come to resent me, nor do I wish to be trapped in an arrangement that proves intolerable. 3 months allows us both to enter into marriage with open eyes, should we proceed. It was so reasonable, so logical, that Theodora could find no argument against it. And yet, something about the proposal troubled her. You would risk such a sum with no guarantee of return, she asked, studying his profile. The Count's lips curved into that small, enigmatic smile. Consider it an investment in potential happiness. Even I, practical as I am, recognize that some gambles are worth taking. There it was, a hint of something beneath the cool, rational exterior. Something that did not quite align with the image of the detached businessman he presented to the world. "Then I accept your terms," Theodora said, extending her hand as though to seal a business deal. Instead of shaking it, the Count raised her gloved fingers to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. "To a mutually beneficial arrangement, Lady Theodora." The touch of his mouth against her hand, even through the barrier of her glove, sent an unexpected warmth coursing through her veins. A purely physiological response, she told herself firmly. Nothing more. "To a mutually beneficial arrangement," she echoed, withdrawing her hand and turning her gaze back to the park, where the afternoon sun dappled the paths with patterns of light and shadow. It was, she reflected, an entirely satisfactory outcome. A practical solution to her predicament, devoid of messy emotional entanglements. If she felt a curious hollowness beneath her satisfaction, she chose to ignore it. The news of their engagement spread through London society with the speed of a racing fire. By the time the announcement appeared in the Morning Post 3 days later, there was scarcely a drawing-room or gentlemen's club in which it was not the primary topic of conversation. Lady Theodora Greystone, daughter of the late Earl of Warrington, to Count Thaddeus Grantham of Bavaria and Northumberland. The marriage will take place after a courtship of 3 months. 3 months! Lady Jersey exclaimed at an evening musicale, her fan fluttering rapidly. Most irregular. In my day, engagements were announced only when the wedding was imminent. Perhaps they wish for time to become better acquainted, suggested Mrs. Fitzwilliam, a matron of liberal views. The Count has been abroad for many years, after all. Lady Jersey's eyebrows arched dramatically. Become acquainted? Before marriage? What a novel concept! Next you'll suggest they should like each other as well. The gentlemen's discussions were equally animated, though centered more on financial matters. Smart move on Grantham's part, declared Lord Pembroke at White's. The Greystone girl comes from excellent stock. Bit of a scandal with her father's debts, but the family name opens doors that mere money cannot. And the lady gets a wealthy husband to save her from ruin, added Sir Walter Elliot. Quite the tidy arrangement for them both. Call it what it is, grumbled old Lord Harwick, who had seen too many seasons come and go to maintain any illusions. A marriage of convenience, pure and simple. Meanwhile, the subjects of all this speculation were engaged in a courtship that was anything but conventional. True to his word, Count Grantham had settled the late Earl's debts immediately following their engagement, thereby securing Thornfield and Lady Warrington's future. "You have my eternal gratitude," Theodora told him as they strolled through the gardens of her great-aunt's townhouse the day after the transaction was complete. "My mother can scarcely believe our good fortune." "It was merely the fulfillment of our agreement," the Count replied, though he seemed pleased by her gratitude. "Nothing more. Nevertheless, you have saved my family from ruin, and I shall not forget it." A shadow passed across his features. "Let us hope you do not come to regret our bargain." "Why should I?" Theodora asked, genuinely puzzled. "You have been the soul of honor and consideration. The weight of obligation can be a heavy burden," he said quietly. "I would not wish you to feel that you have exchanged one form of bondage for another." Theodora stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "Is that how you see marriage? As bondage?" The Count's expression grew distant. "I have seen it become so, yes. My own parents." He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, but Theodora sensed a story there, one that might explain his reluctance to marry. "My parents' marriage began in love and ended in bitterness," she offered, hoping to encourage his confidence. "My father's gambling and drinking destroyed what was once a happy union. That is why I prefer our approach, clear-eyed and practical." The Count studied her face, his gaze searching. "And you truly believe that a marriage without love is preferable to one that begins with it?" "I believe that expectations of eternal passion lead only to disappointment," Theodora replied firmly. "Far better to build on the solid foundation of mutual respect and shared goals." "A reasonable philosophy," he conceded, though something in his tone suggested he was not entirely convinced. "I suppose we shall discover its merits in practice." As the weeks passed, Theodora found herself drawn into a routine with the Count that was both comfortable and confounding. Their official courtship involved all the expected public appearances, drives in the park, attendance at the opera, dinners, and balls where they were invariably seated together. In these settings, they played their parts to perfection, presenting the picture of a well-matched couple. It was their private moments that Theodora found increasingly difficult to categorize. 3 or 4 times a week, the Count would call at the Duchess's townhouse, where they would spend an hour or two in conversation. These discussions ranged from literature to politics, from art to philosophy, and Theodora discovered to her surprise that they were often the highlight of her day. The Count, Thaddeus, as she now thought of him, possessed a formidable intellect and a dry wit that matched her own. He listened to her opinions with genuine interest, never dismissing her thoughts as many gentlemen did with ladies. More surprisingly, he seemed to value her practical nature rather than finding it unfeminine. "Most men," she remarked one afternoon as they sat in the Duchess's drawing-room, "seem to prefer women who are decorative rather than useful. They want a pretty ornament for their home, not a thinking partner." Thaddeus's mouth quirked into that small smile that she had come to anticipate with unreasonable pleasure. "I have never seen the appeal of ornaments. They gather dust and serve no purpose." "Whereas I am eminently useful," Theodora said lightly. "You are eminently interesting," he corrected her, his grey eyes warm with genuine appreciation. "And that, to my mind, is far more valuable than conventional beauty." The compliment, so unexpected and so evidently sincere, caused a flutter of something perilously close to pleasure in Theodora's chest. She quickly suppressed it. "You are kind to say so," she replied, keeping her tone deliberately light. "Though I believe most of society would disagree with your assessment." "Most of society," Thaddeus said dryly, "also believes that a gentleman's worth can be measured by the cut of his coat or the lineage of his horse. I have never found majority opinion to be a reliable guide to truth." Theodora laughed, genuinely delighted by his perspective. "We are a pair of cynics, are we not? Both so determined to see the world as it is, rather than as poets and romantics would have us believe." "Perhaps," he agreed, though there was an odd note in his voice. "Though I sometimes wonder if we might be missing something in our dedication to clear-sighted practicality." Before Theodora could inquire further, the Duchess swept into the room, effectively ending their private conversation. But his words lingered in Theodora's mind long after he had taken his leave, causing her to question, for the first time, whether her rejection of romantic sentiment might be as much a defense as a philosophy. As the weeks of their courtship passed, Theodora began to notice subtle changes in their relationship. What had begun as a business-like arrangement was developing unexpected dimensions. The Count, Thaddeus, seemed increasingly attentive to her comfort and happiness. He remembered her preferences, anticipated her needs, and showed consideration in 100 small ways that went far beyond the requirements of their agreement. More disconcertingly, Theodora found herself looking forward to his company with an eagerness that could not be explained by mere intellectual stimulation. She caught herself watching the clock before his visits, taking extra care with her appearance, and feeling a warmth in her chest when he entered a room that had nothing to do with practical considerations. These developments troubled her. She had entered into their arrangement specifically to avoid emotional entanglements. And yet, Here she was, experiencing what felt dangerously like attachment. "You seem distracted today," Thaddeus observed one afternoon as they walked through the British Museum, ostensibly to view a new exhibition of classical sculptures but in reality to continue their private conversations away from the Duchess's sharp ears. "Do I?" Theodora replied, trying to sound unconcerned. "I suppose I was lost in thought." "Penny for them?" he asked, his expression gentle. Theodora hesitated, then decided that honesty was best. "I was thinking about our arrangement." A shadow crossed his face. "Having second thoughts?" "No," she said quickly, then amended, "not precisely. It's just that." She paused, struggling to articulate her concern without revealing too much. "I find myself growing rather accustomed to your company." "Is that a problem?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "It could be," Theodora admitted, "if it leads to expectations beyond our agreement." Thaddeus was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on a marble statue of Aphrodite that stood before them, her stone face serene and unknowable. "What if," he said finally, his voice so low she had to lean closer to hear him, "our expectations were to change? What if we both found ourselves wanting something different than what we initially agreed upon?" Theodora's heart gave a peculiar lurch. "That would be complicated." "Life often is," he replied, turning to face her directly. "Especially when it refuses to conform to our carefully laid plans." There was something in his gaze, a warmth, a question, that made Theodora's carefully constructed defenses waver. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to want more from their marriage than a practical partnership. To desire not just mutual respect but genuine affection. To hope for joy rather than mere contentment. The thought was so seductive, and so frightening, that she pulled back instinctively. "We agreed to a specific arrangement," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "One based on reason rather than emotion. I think it's best if we adhere to those terms." Something flickered in Thaddeus's eyes, disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. "As you wish," he said quietly. They continued their tour of the exhibition, but the easy rapport they had enjoyed earlier was gone, replaced by a strained politeness that Theodora told herself was preferable to the dangerous territory they had nearly entered. That night, alone in her bedchamber, Theodora faced the uncomfortable truth she had been avoiding. She was developing feelings for the Count that went far beyond their practical arrangement. Feelings that threatened the very foundation of their agreement. "This is precisely what I wished to avoid," she murmured to herself as she paced the room restlessly. The messy, unpredictable nature of attachment. The vulnerability. The potential for disappointment and pain. And yet, try as she might, she could not regret the connection that was forming between them. There was something about Thaddeus, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, his respect for her mind, that spoke to a part of her she had long denied. A part that longed for more than mere security. "This is madness," she told her reflection in the mirror. "Pure, unadulterated folly. The very thing I swore to avoid." Her reflection offered no solutions, only the truth she was reluctant to face. The heart, it seemed, did not always follow the dictates of reason. The following week brought the Duchess of Havensfield's annual Midsummer Ball, an event that would mark the official introduction of Theodora and Thaddeus as an engaged couple to the highest echelons of society. It was, in many ways, the culmination of their practical arrangement, proof that their mutual goals were being achieved. The night of the ball, Theodora stood before her mirror in a gown of silver silk that shimmered like moonlight with every movement. The Duchess had spared no expense, insisting that her great-niece must outshine every other young lady present. "You look beautiful, my lady," Fletcher said as she arranged the final touches to Theodora's hair, an elegant coiffure adorned with diamond pins that had once belonged to her grandmother. Theodora studied her reflection critically. The gown was undeniably flattering, emphasizing her slender figure and complementing her fair complexion. The diamonds at her throat and ears, on loan from her great-aunt, added a touch of splendor that befitted her station if not her actual circumstances. "I look like a proper countess," she said, attempting to feel satisfaction rather than the strange melancholy that had settled over her. "The Count will be most impressed," Fletcher replied with a knowing smile. Theodora's heart gave that peculiar lurch again at the mention of Thaddeus. "His impression is immaterial," she said, more sharply than she intended. "Ours is an arrangement of convenience, not affection." Fletcher's expression turned skeptical. "If you say so, my lady. Though I've noticed the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." "And how is that?" Theodora asked before she could stop herself. "Like a man seeing the sun for the first time after a long winter," Fletcher said simply. "Not that it's my place to say, of course." Theodora dismissed the maid's observation as romantic nonsense, yet she could not entirely quell the flutter of hope it inspired. Perhaps Thaddeus, too, was finding their practical arrangement becoming something more. The Duchess's ballroom was transformed for the occasion into a scene from mythology, a woodland glade where nymphs and gods might dance. Hundreds of candles cast a golden glow over garlands of summer flowers and greenery, while musicians played from a dais partially concealed by potted trees. Theodora descended the grand staircase on her great-aunt's arm, aware of the eyes that turned in their direction. She scanned the crowd automatically, searching for one particular face. She found him standing near a column at the far end of the room, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. Unlike most of the gentlemen present, who had adopted the colorful waistcoats and elaborately tied cravats currently in fashion, Thaddeus wore evening clothes of unrelieved black save for the crisp white of his shirt and cravat. The severity of his attire should have seemed forbidding. Instead, it emphasized the powerful lines of his body and the intense focus of his gaze, which was fixed directly on her. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, it seemed to Theodora that everyone else faded into insignificance. There was something in his expression, a heat, a hunger, that belied all their careful discussions of practicality and reason. Then someone stepped between them, breaking the connection, and the moment passed. By the time Theodora reached the bottom of the stairs, Thaddeus had composed himself, approaching her with the polite smile he wore in public. "Lady Theodora," he said, bowing over her hand. "You are resplendent tonight." "Count Grantham," she replied, dropping into a curtsy. "You are too kind." They stood for a moment in awkward silence, the easy camaraderie of their private conversations nowhere in evidence. It was as though they had become strangers again, or perhaps merely remembered that they were supposed to be playing parts rather than revealing their true selves. "I believe this dance is mine," Thaddeus said finally as the orchestra began a new set. "Of course," Theodora agreed, placing her hand on his arm. They moved onto the dance floor with practiced grace, taking their positions for a country dance that required them to separate and rejoin repeatedly. Each time they came together, Theodora felt the tension between them grow, a strange admixture of attraction and restraint, desire and denial. "You've been avoiding me this past week," Thaddeus said during one such moment of proximity, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I've been busy with preparations for the ball," Theodora replied, evading the truth. His eyes, grey as storm clouds, saw through the prevarication. "We agreed to honesty between us, did we not?" Theodora flushed, caught in the fossard. "Yes," she admitted. "I have been avoiding you." "May I ask why?" The dance separated them before she could answer, forcing her to wait through several figures before they came together again. "Because," she said when they were finally close enough for private conversation once more, "I find myself struggling to maintain the boundaries of our arrangement." Thaddeus's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on hers. In what way? Again, the dance parted them, leaving Theodora's pulse racing and her thoughts in disarray. When next they met, she found she could not continue the pretense. I am developing feelings for you, she confessed in a rush, her voice barely audible above the music. Feelings that go beyond our agreement. And I fear they may complicate matters between us. The admission cost her dearly. She had prided herself on her practicality, her immunity to romantic foolishness. To confess such weakness felt like a betrayal of everything she had claimed to believe. Thaddeus's expression remained inscrutable as they were once again separated by the pattern of the dance. Theodora's heart pounded painfully in her chest as she waited to rejoin him, dreading his response yet needing to hear it. When they came together for the final figure, his face was grave. "We should discuss this privately," he said. "Meet me on the terrace in 10 minutes." The dance ended, and he escorted her back to her great-aunt's side with impeccable courtesy. To all outward appearances, nothing had changed between them. Only Theodora, her cheeks flushed and her hands trembling slightly, knew that everything had. 10 minutes later, having made her excuses to the Duchess, Theodora slipped through the French doors that led to the terrace. The night air was cool against her heated skin, fragrant with the scent of roses from the garden below. Thaddeus stood at the stone balustrade, his back to the house, a solitary figure silhouetted against the star-strewn sky. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, his face in shadow. "Theodora!" "Thaddeus!" She moved to stand beside him, grateful for the relative privacy the terrace afforded. "I apologize for my admission during the dance. It was inappropriate." "No," he said quietly. "It was honest. And I value your honesty far more than I value propriety." Theodora gripped the cold stone of the balustrade, steadying herself. "Nevertheless, I understand that it complicates our arrangement. If you wish to reconsider our engagement, I would understand." Thaddeus was silent for a long moment, his profile sharp against the night sky. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note she had never heard before, a vulnerability that belied his usual self-possession. "What if I told you that I, too, am struggling with unexpected feelings? That our practical arrangement has become something else to me?" Theodora's heart seemed to stop, then race forward at twice its normal speed. "I would say that we find ourselves in a most unanticipated predicament." A soft laugh escaped him, warm with genuine amusement. "Indeed. We set out to make a marriage of convenience, only to find ourselves inconveniently falling in," he broke off, as though catching himself on the edge of a precipice. "In what?" Theodora pressed, needing to hear the word even as she feared it. Thaddeus turned to face her fully, his eyes silvered by moonlight. "In love," he said simply. "At least, I am. And if I've misinterpreted your feelings, then I beg your forgiveness for my presumption." Love. The word hung between them, at once terrifying and exhilarating. Theodora had spent years building defenses against this very possibility, convincing herself that love was a delusion, a trap, a path to inevitable disappointment. And yet, standing here with Thaddeus, she could no longer deny the truth. Somehow, against all reason and intention, she had fallen in love with the man she had chosen for entirely practical reasons. "You haven't misinterpreted," she whispered, "the admission both a surrender and a victory. Though I've tried very hard to convince myself otherwise." Relief and joy transformed Thaddeus's austere features, softening them in a way she had rarely seen. He reached for her hands, enfolding them in his own. "I never planned for this," he confessed. "When we made our arrangement, I truly believed that a practical partnership was all I wanted, all I was capable of wanting. My parents' marriage was a battlefield, their love having curdled into resentment long before I was old enough to understand why. I swore I would never risk such misery. As did I, Theodora said, understanding completely. My father's weaknesses destroyed what love my parents once shared. I thought romance a fool's game, best avoided by sensible people. And yet, here we are, Thaddeus said with a rueful smile. Two practical people ambushed by the very emotion we sought to avoid. Here we are, Theodora agreed, a strange lightness filling her chest. What do we do now? Thaddeus's expression grew serious. That depends on what you want, Theodora. Our arrangement can continue as planned, a marriage of convenience between two people who happen to care for each other. Or, she prompted when he hesitated. Or we can acknowledge that our circumstances have changed. That we are no longer entering into marriage merely for practical benefits, but because we desire a true union, one based on love as well as respect. The choice he offered was clear, and yet Theodora found herself hesitating on the brink of commitment. Old fears died hard. Love is unpredictable, she said softly. Unreliable. What if what we feel now changes? What if, like my parents, we come to resent each other? That is always a risk, Thaddeus acknowledged. But is safety worth the cost of denying what we feel? Would you rather live without risk, or without joy? The question struck at the heart of Theodora's carefully constructed worldview. All her life, she had chosen safety, emotional safety, over vulnerability. She had observed her mother's suffering and decided that the price of love was too high to pay. But standing here with Thaddeus, feeling the warmth of his hands around hers and seeing the tenderness in his eyes, she suddenly understood that there was a greater risk than loving and losing, never loving at all. Joy, she said firmly, making her choice. I choose joy, and you, and whatever may come of it. The smile that broke across Thaddeus's face was like sunrise after the longest night, radiant with hope and happiness. Without a word, he drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke more eloquently than words of the emotion that had ambushed them both. When they finally parted, breathless and a little dazed, Theodora looked up at him with wonder. This is madness, you know. Complete folly. The very best kind, Thaddeus agreed, his eyes alight with mischief and something deeper, more enduring. And to think, it all began with a purely practical arrangement. Theodora laughed, the sound pure and joyful in the night air. Perhaps we're not quite as practical as we believed ourselves to be. Or perhaps, Thaddeus suggested, drawing her close once more, love is the most practical choice of all. For what could be more sensible than choosing happiness? And as his lips met hers again beneath the canopy of stars, Theodora decided that, for once in her life, she would not argue the point. 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Lady Theodora Greystone became Countess Grantham in a ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square. The bride wore ivory silk and carried roses from the gardens of Thornfield, which had flourished under the Count's careful stewardship. The groom could not take his eyes from his bride's face, his customary reserve replaced by an expression of such undisguised adoration that even the most cynical observers were moved. A love match after all, whispered Lady Jersey to the Duchess of Havensfield as they watched the couple exchange vows. Who would have thought it, when it began so obviously as an arrangement of convenience? The Duchess smiled, a knowing gleam in her aged eyes. My dear Sally, the most successful marriages often begin with the head and end with the heart. I never doubted it for a moment. As the newly wedded couple emerged from the church to a shower of flower petals and well wishes, Theodora looked up at her husband, no longer Count but husband, beloved, partner in all things, and felt a surge of gratitude for the twist of fate that had led her to him. Happy? Thaddeus asked, his voice low and intimate despite the crowd surrounding them. Beyond measure, Theodora replied truthfully. And you? His answer was a kiss, brief but fervent, that scandalized the older generation and delighted the younger. Does that answer your question, Countess Grantham? Theodora laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed in the autumn air. Most eloquently, my lord. Most eloquently indeed. And so it was that a marriage entered into for the most practical of reasons became, in the end, the greatest love story either of them had ever known. Not because fate had decreed it, nor because society expected it, but because two people who had guarded their hearts too carefully for too long finally found the courage to risk everything for the chance of joy. A most convenient arrangement, indeed.